All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So thanks everyone for joining. The topic of this conversation is about technology's evolution. Where do we see technology going in 5, 10, and 15 years? I think I can guarantee that everything that you hear will be wrong in some fashion, but I think we always gain a lot by trying to force our minds ahead into what the future is going to be like. So we'll start off with, so the format we had in mind is we'll start off with some introductions of the different folks in the panel, and then we'll kind of level set, where do we see the interesting things happening now, and then we'll kind of look at the different areas of computing that are relevant. And I think we'd encourage you to ask questions as we go along. There's probably as much or more knowledge, in the audience as us, and we're just trying to help catalyze the conversation. Great. So we'll start off. We'll start off on the far end with some introductions, kind of explain your background and kind of a little bit of point of view, and if you don't mind.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, I'll introduce myself last.
Hi everyone. It's not working. Mic check. Just slide it on. Hi everyone. My name is Sterling Lujan. I work for Bitcoin.com as a journalist. I also have a consultation business where I work with individual clients to help them get involved using cryptocurrency. I also help people wanting to get involved in investing in cryptocurrency, especially in regards to my opinions on various altcoins and other cryptographic protocols that are cropping up in the system. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from Texas A&M University. I'm working on a master's degree in counseling.
Hi, my name's Dino Farinacci. I work for Lispers.net. It's just my own consulting company. I built routers and switches for about 25 years. I was a Cisco fellow from the early 90s all the way through 2012. I've been working on Lisp, Locator ID Separation Protocol, for the last 10 years. It's the 10th anniversary of Lisp this year. In the IETF and IRTF, these are standards-based internet standards-based organizations. I'm a software engineer by trade. If you think the internet doesn't work very well, you can blame me. It's probably one of my bugs. But anyways, so I have a lot of interesting views on where I think the internet should go, and Lisp is really a next generation overlay protocol. We used to run the internet on laptops over the PSTN network, over the phone network. And now we run it over fiber, wireless, whatever. And I think the next generation network are going to be overlays, are going to use the actual substrate, which is the internet today, is just going to be a utility, and the overlay is really going to be where all the features are done. Features, from my perspective, is at the network layer. To me, Bitcoin and all the cryptocurrencies is just another application that runs on top of the internet.
Interesting. Thank you. My name is Brett Tabke. I am founder and owner of pubcon.com. It's an internet marketing conference. We run about 3 events a year. Our big one's coming up in November. About 3,000 people will be attending. Before that, I ran a large online forum called Webmaster World. It was kind of the center for search engine optimization on the internet, probably most famous for. We spawned Google Guy out of Google. Matt Cutts talked on Webmaster World for years about Google. He now is at Digital Services in the U.S. government, the folks who saved healthcare.gov. Before that, I was a programmer by trade. I worked for Gateway 2000 for a long time. In the 80s, I worked on ICs like the 65C816 chip that's in the Apple II GS. I did documentation on ICs. I wrote a lot of programs, so I've been involved in them a long time. And I kind of agree with Dino. I think the future is going to be distributed, but I believe our phones are going to be the basis for that distribution. So hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit today.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to talk about what's going to disrupt the mobile phone, so that'll be pretty interesting. I'm Michael Reed. I'm the CEO and creator of Practical VR, and even though we have VR in the name, we're really focused more on mixed reality, the next frontier of collaborative computing, and how we share that next frontier of reality. So hopefully I can bring some discussion to the table. I'm a business guy turned programmer, and I learned to program specifically for the industry of mixed reality. Never thought I'd be a master in time to actually build this entire next world, but I thought I could build something cool enough to get the masters involved. So that's my track record, that's my past. I've stayed very close, in tune with Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, the emergence. I started watching Bitcoin in 2012, and it's just been amazing to see how it's gone from its infancy to where we are now, and even though it's still technically in its infancy, right? So that's me. I'm excited for the discussion today, and I'm hoping soon one day somebody else will call me a futurist instead of me calling myself a futurist. So we'll see after this panel, right?
Hi, my name is Arry. I'm the COO of StormX. We are one of those companies tokenizing the Storm token, and we're doing it for a product called Storm Market, the ability for people anywhere to earn any time from any device. My future perspective is that we're at a very pivotal point in time. We're talking about devices or maybe VR, but I actually believe the future is device agnostic. The ability to go up to any device, like I could just take your phone and be able to put in my credentials and it would automatically set up for whatever I like to do, or I could go up to any desktop or whatever. Imagine that kind of world, and being able to design to that future is what I love. My background is I actually went from right brain to left brain, so 20 years as a musician and artist. Then I accidentally fell into the world of programming. My first job, my boss said to me, "Hey, you're Asian. You're probably good at math." Well, you know, I learned fast. And so this is kind of crazy, because if you're a general manager of a multi-billion-dollar software company, what are you going to do? Choose the 22-year-old Asian girl to put together all of your executive reporting to base all of your business decisions on? They did. So I learned how to do finance very quickly, but being the 23-year-old at that time, finance guys didn't want to do any tech, and so they said, "Hey, you go work with those IT people." And I said, "Okay." Started working with those IT people, and they said, "Hey, do you know how to code?" "No, I know how to play the piano." And they said, "Well, you're going to learn to code. Start with SQL. Boom, 3 days. You're going to start doing all of our logical and rational diagrams for our databases." Who does that? Yes, that's how I started. Fast forward, it was apparent that I got really good at this, and so I got recruited over and over again, where Hitachi was starting a new office in Seattle, and they said, "Hey, you want to help us start a new office?" Sure. I mean, really, like I was 24 years old at this time, and they're having, I'm the third person brought in to help grow their office. We grew it from the 2 people to about 20 people. I left and helped join KPMG CFO Advisory Services in 2006. And so they were starting a new Seattle office, helped them grow it from about 3 to about 20-ish people. And then left that company when a new company was growing a Seattle office, brought in as the third person, brought to about 35 people, left that company. So I'm the person that you bring in when you want to scale something really big. And then my background is I've actually been the solution architect, having gone, a little bit haphazardly through the tech world. I'm the person that has built solutions for large companies like the Googles, the Expedias, the Microsofts, helping them build enterprise-level systems.
Great, thank you. So I'm John Held. I am a strategy consultant. I focus on technology, specifically emerging areas of technology, and I work with large companies in retail, manufacturing, some work with charitable organizations to understand which of those technologies they should use. And then once we've identified, one of those initiatives, I'll typically take it from concept through implementation. So I've worked in areas like APIs, analytics, migrating systems from legacy, Oracle, Java stacks into the cloud with security. I've been a co-inventor in a number of software applications. So really pleased to be here. We'll kick it off with the first question. So the science fiction writer, William Gibson said, I might get this a little off, but he said, the future's already here. It's just not well distributed. And I think if we all think back to 2012, a lot of the super interesting things that we see today, we kind of had a little bit of awareness back in 2012. Those seedlings were growing. So I'll take, we'll kind of ask the panel, what are some things that are happening right now that are examples of the future that are going to be bigger in 5 years? And maybe, yeah, we'll go ahead and start off with Sterling.
Yeah, so one of the really cool things that's happening in the blockchain space right now that's going to be even larger in 5 years is there's a piece of technology that's called Steemit. Is anybody familiar with Steemit here? And I talk about Steemit a lot because I use it religiously. It's a beautiful platform. And the goal behind Steemit is basically that users can earn cryptocurrency rewards via a delegated proof of stake functionality, which basically means a computer algorithm is delegating cryptographic rewards to people for the blog content. So Dan Larimer, the individual who created this platform, said that this is basically a point system, and this point system is what gives rise to the cryptocurrency tokens. Now, this is groundbreaking because it's really the first piece of technology that I've noticed where people can get paid without having an old school brick and mortar job or having to defer to some type of boss or some type of person who's telling them what to do. So it's automatically changing the landscape in that regard. And I think just over the next 5 years, we're going to see more of these cryptographic blogging platforms. That's basically a form of mining, making money mining via blogging. These things are going to continue to creep up. And there's another one called the Yours Network that was created by a gentleman by the name of Charles X. Ryan. And it's a similar platform that's based on a paywall system. You put Bitcoin Cash into the system, and you can write articles, write blogs, and charge users Bitcoin Cash, which is usually a small percentage or a small fee. And we're going to continue to see these blogging platforms crop up. It's going to have huge implications for media. It's going to have huge implications for blogging in general and spreading content in a more decentralized way. And it's really going to disrupt all of these institutions regarding media, regarding writing, journalistic endeavors, the whole 9 yards.
So I think the future is going to be in many different varieties at different levels, and I'm going to speak at the lowest level first. I think all your children that are going to be born into this world are going to be given IPv6 addresses at day one, just like their birth certificates, just like social security numbers, just like cell phones. And that's going to be their endpoint ID. That's going to be the address they're going to use to send packets wherever they communicate on the internet. And you're going to have lots of addresses because you're going to have lots of things on your body that are going to be internet connected. And they're all going to be multi-homed. Multi-homes means that a single CPU will have multiple connections to the internet, either LTE, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, satellite, or whatever. And we want all those connections to work to give you the most amount of bandwidth for the least amount of cost. So just like you're born with the name Joe Smith and your friends call you Joe and your colleagues call you Mr. Smith, I think we should have an endpoint address at the network layer that you use that stays static all the time and that it bounds to a dynamic locator, which means that address will always bind to where you're currently connected to the network. Right now it's the Alpine Meadows Wi-Fi, but you're also connected to your LTE network as well. This is the sort of thing that Lisp does. What we need to do is we need to make the internet at the lowest levels look like local number portability is on the cell phone network. None of us will never get a new cell phone number again. We'll use it for the rest of our lives. It kind of describes us. It turns out that's not going to be true because I ordered the Series 3, right? It's going to have an LTE interface. Turns out the way the Apple did it is that my cell phone number and this number are going to share the same connection. It's going to share the same identification, but it's really going to be two separate devices. Well, I think as time goes on, someone's going to want to send certain types of packets to my phone, but different types of packets to this watch. This watch is not going to need as much data as other things. We're going to see this with the Internet of Things. You look around this room, everything that you see will be internet connected. Scary, kind of. Can you hack into it? Possibly. These are all the things. And if you look at it between 5, 10, and 15 years, the idea comes out in 5 years, 10 years, or 5 years later, it becomes scalable, which means all the things that you see are going on right now with redesigns of the blockchains and the protocols are changing. It's because they're learning because of the initial Bitcoin deployment. and they learn, they want to improve it. The only problem is there's real money flowing over, and that's what's a little scary. For me, when I screwed up building the internet, packets were just dropped on the floor. And usually that didn't cause lives to be lost or money to be lost. It kind of did in the financial world. But so when you go from 5 years to 10 years, you have the idea, you deploy it. By 5 years later, usually it scales better because you see the type of scalability requirements you really need. Not what you thought 5 years later, but what you see today. Then 10 years later, it goes into production, or 5 years after that. So that's kind of the evolution I see with all technologies. And it's kind of funny looking at the younger people designing all the blockchain stuff now. I look at this, I go, oh, they're making the same mistakes we made with BGP in the early 90s building the internet, right? And so, being an open consultant, I want to be able to, these are the lessons learned, tell people that this is what we did, why are you taking this approach? Of course, every evolution of technology has new requirements. It's a different time. We weren't able to, input on your phones with your finger. This is, all this stuff comes together, putting terabytes of memory on your body, putting antennas in the fibers of your clothing, so I can get a better signal because you have a good antenna in your red shirt. These are the sorts of things that I see are going to be coming. More to come.
Cool. So the new iWatch doesn't have its own phone number?
It does not have its own phone number.
Really?
Yep.
Okay.
$10 a month from AT&T. Now, is that a lot or too much? I don't know.
I'd like to ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
How is that going to impact privacy and if everywhere, everybody knows I mean, what is,
So we're not going to have any privacy, but this is a good thing because we will totally be open and transparent. Everybody, our politicians, So is this good or bad? You take the good with the bad. Some things need to be private, of course, but if they need to be private, you don't use the tools that you have. If you need to say something to me and it's private, it needs to be a physical thing. We need to go in the back corner, make sure none of the IoT devices are listening to us.
Well, that's a question about the IoT stuff, the cameras.
everything will be on paper? Or
It's,
if you want to have a conversation?
well, what is the Bitcoin guy saying the most secure way to have your Bitcoins are to print them out on paper?
I have a background in privacy rights advocacy, so obviously I hope that we can build a future that is more private conscious and private aware, and give us methods to be private where necessary. I mean, along those same lines of thoughts, maybe we can change our identities on the fly, right? Maybe we can reassociate who we are. There's sci-fi short films that for augmented reality to where you see a person literally wipe their identity and they start over new and everything is wiped. Their apps, their contact list, every bit of them is wiped. And it's really interesting to think about that. But we do need the ability to have private communication going forward,
Absolutely.
right? I mean, if you imagine just IP that's developed alone, people have bright ideas all day long. And if centralized entities can take a glimpse into your life and they can see the IP that you're coming up with and they can steal your IP because it's not private, right? That's a real challenge. So we do need encrypted forms of communication. We do need private forms of communication. So I think that's a big question, and that's a big balance that we have to find going into these future years is how do we keep that balance of privacy? And so a very good question. That's
On
also
the flip side, on the practical side, but it's like I tell my 10-year-old daughter all the time, just assume everything you do all day long is either recorded somewhere, it's going to be broadcast somewhere, you're going to be sitting in a job interview and somebody says, well, in 1999, you said X, Y, Z. So you got to assume that there's not going to be privacy in the near term.
Well, I imagine technologies like maybe quantum encryption, right? We might be able to know if our data has been looked at before we actually get it on our end device. So then we at least have knowledge that it's not private. And I think that could be an interesting development over the next few years. And what we see there is just knowing what is private and what isn't, and how we adjust communication based on if we know somebody else looked at it.
So your point about changing identity is important because what we've done in Lisp is that this IPv6 address can be an opaque number, and every connection you make to the system could be a random number. And so you really, if you do an HTTP connection to Google with one IPv6 address, it doesn't really know it's you because the next one you're going to make is going to be something different. We could also take this 128-bit value and make it a hash of a public key and make it a crypto EID. And then we can also encrypt the data plane, which means we've obfuscated the packets on the network as well. So.
And that's really interesting because we've developed an analytics platform, and the first analytics platform for mixed reality. And that's exactly what we did. I didn't want to assign any sort of identity to users that authenticate on our platform. But we still needed some sort of identity so we could target users and collect data in individual formats, right? So that's what we did. We generated SECP 256K1 crypto keys, public key, private key pairs, and we just see a public key. We don't see any sort of personally identifiable information to users on our platform. We're not going to ask people to type in an email. We're not going to ask people to give us a phone number. All we will ever see when we're collecting data through our analytics is that public key. That's all I ever care to see.
When those people interact, they're going to want to know verified identity. You know, one of the big differences between the old community networks like the bulletin board systems and the online forums and the Facebooks and the Twitters, you know, Twitter is nothing, just a minor little tweak on an IRC channel. Just a minor little tweak of whether you can let somebody into the channel or whether they decide to follow you. That's the only minor tweak that Twitter was. No new software, no new processes behind that. The one big tweak was identity. You know who you were following. It wasn't Bugs Bunny 44 in Orlando. It was Jane Smith in Dallas, Texas. So identity.
You mean the real John Smith?
Right.
Right.
And he wasn't 19. He was. So I think identity is huge.
I don't know if you got my point, but most of the handles are real something.
Right. All the handles.
Or the really real, right?
Right.
As they keep getting compromised.
So I think identity is huge. Being able to verify identity is just massive going forward.
Yes,
Want to know.
especially in like a shared reality and a shared format like that. You're going to want to share stuff with your friends, but maybe you can take that master key and you can split off different public keys and have different personas off of that's what you go by, right? You have one that you share with people that you know personally. You have one that you share as your online pseudonym, right? Where you go play your games or whatever. So there's still ways to, I feel, maintain that balance of privacy to where we, the central entity, don't necessarily need to know who that person is, but still allow them to share content with each other and their friends. So
Just like a Bitcoin address, right?
Exactly, yes.
It's just not
Yeah.
public-private key, it's just a hash, but it's the same idea.
So I spent several years working with researchers from various software institutions, including Carnegie Mellon University. And I think to really achieve global decentralization, we are going to eventually have to come together and start to coordinate and collaborate. Like right now, what I'm hearing is you have different entities and companies. We're all really excited about blockchain, but we're all recreating the wheel and coming up with our own theoretical best practices that have already been solved, right? Obviously, like you have a wealth of experience with internet, and getting that information shared so that we can iterate upon it as a community is the only way we're going to get to that decentralized, community-enabled, human-centric state of affairs. And then, since I'm thinking about production and scalability, the only way we actually get from technology forward thinking to human forward thinking is thinking about, I guess you'd call it like the lowest common denominator. Most people will say, I know this is not PC, but think about grandma. How do you explain to grandma that she can go and buy Bitcoin and send it? It's a pretty complicated, non-human experience for today. So to get to true decentralization, not only do we have to coordinate and iterate upon best practices, shared, not recreating the wheel all by ourselves in little silos, we actually have to start thinking about human-centric, easy ways where we can really democratize access to this technology and really empower people to come together.
My futurist is really going to show here, but I think that a lot of that societal forward thinking, combined forward thinking on a humanity level, really will come at the point where we start connecting ourselves into a massive cloud, all of us, right? And we contribute thoughts on a regular basis to a cloud, and we do start thinking more as a society because we are more connected at that point, right? Right now, we are still individuals, and there's many aspects of individuals, and most people are out there for themselves, and they want to gather what they can for themselves and their close relatives, right? But I think that as we become more connected digitally, I don't see social media as the digital connection that I'm talking about here, but I see that as digital becomes more physical and we're more connected through that, and we start sharing our thoughts and receiving thoughts directly from this digital world, I feel that that we will kind of restore a familial bond in humanity, and we will start looking more towards human advancement versus individual advancement. So that's very interesting thoughts there.
That's great. So I'm going to try to kind of sum up where we are today. I think the common theme here is that as a society, we're going to deal a lot in the next 5 years with questions of identity, security, and community,
That was
right?
their points.
Right, and how you choose to share or not share certain aspects of yourself with others digitally. So, pretty good synopsis. Did I miss any kind of main points? And then along that way, there's going to be advances in protocols, cloud, and other things that are going to make that possible. So I think that kind of gets us through, in some way, the next 5 years, and of course, the whole concept that we're talking about here today, which is the evolution of the exchange of value and that evolution. So I'll kind of throw a curveball out here. I think, any of us watch TV, we look at the advances in self-driving cars and these amazing devices we have. There's a lot of things to be really surprised at and celebrate in technology. What are the areas of technology that have been most disappointing where you think there's going to be progress? And I'll start it off. I'll throw out one that's near and dear to me. I think it's, and it's not my point of view, but Nicholas Negroponte, who wrote Being Digital, he said, he did a speech at a TED Talk, and he said, if I go back to my book that I wrote 10 years ago, there's been a tremendous amount of advance. A lot of the things I said would happen came true, but the one area I've been just shocked, I'm paraphrasing, is education. In my mind, computing has had such a low impact on what it could have with education. And what I would love to see in the next 10 years is some of the advances we've had in computing to understand people's emotional states, to be able to read and interpret their behaviors applied to helping accelerate kids learning complex processes. That'd be something I'd love to see happen in 10 years, and I think I've seen little in that. So if you guys want to comment on education or another area of technology that's been disappointing to date, but where you would hope or expect to see some progress in the next 10 years.
So one of the areas that's most disappointing to me right now is considerations about government. I'm an anarchist, so I believe that there should be no government infringing on any aspect of our lives. And so my hope is that we can create systems not only for decentralization in the economy at large, but also in our political lives, and we can be freed by technology in this regard. So we really need to create systems that not only look at, and I'll back up just a little bit. I was at the Startup Society Summit in San Francisco just a couple of weeks ago, and their whole focus was wanting to create new forms of governance so that it's not as corrupt as the current system. But I think we should build systems that actually take government out of the equation completely. And I think the movement toward decentralized autonomous organizations can help facilitate this process, because we can create ways to manage society algorithmically that just completely remove any arbiters, anybody who wants to put a gun to our face and tell us how we should live.
Do you want to respond or no? Go ahead. Okay.
Kinda.
Go ahead. If you want to respond, go ahead.
Yeah. I think from an idealistic point of view, yes. But even when you create this automated, anarchist, non-governmental, decentralized view in the world, someone or something is putting into the system their set of ideals and principles. And that is what is really at stake, government or no government. Like, we as a community need to come together and decide what is that ideal state, what is the right amount of community or non-community or exchange of information, and then when you go to education, the education system hasn't evolved to what does set up a person. I mean, I'm a mom myself. What sets up my son for success in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? The system has not evolved to set him up for success. And so as a parent, I have to think about, what does he need to know? What are the principles and things he needs to do so that he can be successful when he sits down and has dinner, or sits on a panel, or goes to a conference, or I don't know, like, These are things that we're not thinking about proactively.
Two things that need to be thought of is AI in teaching. How will artificial intelligence allow students, any student in the world, have access to the best teachers possible, right? And have their questions answered in the same format that we can sit and talk face-to-face in a classroom. And the other aspect is VR and AR type technologies. How can a child in Africa that didn't grow up in the best of situations through telepresence and virtual environments have that same engaging classroom experience? And how do we connect that part of the world so that they can have that same engaging classroom experience? So I think that we have some fusions of technology, and everything that we talk about here is going to just require a massive fusion of tech that comes together. We're not just talking about AR, mixed reality. We're not just talking about AI. We're not just talking about 5G and the future of networking techs. All of these things have to come together and shape and form the next big thing in these regards. So,
We think about all the technology and how we apply it. We tend to think of it as engineers, as a software issue to solve, like solving what Uber did. They disrupted the taxi industry, the public transport, and Amazon has disrupted e-commerce, essentially commerce as we know it. If you take the top 10 retailers in the country, you take the Targets, the Sears, the Kmart's, the Saks, the Kohl's, and you put the top 10 of them together, they're not, you take out Walmart, of course, the top 10 of them are not as big as Amazon is today. So we think of things in physical terms, what we can disrupt and replace. And one of the things that I've been really disappointed in technology has been the application in the medical fields. We hear little tidbits here and there that they're solving things like laser scalpels, and we've heard a little bit about AR helping with some of the surgeries going on. But by and large, the medical field has not been disrupted. It's not been replaced. We know the ongoing angst with the insurance industry and health insurance. We just haven't seen the application of technology effectively, I think, as a broad stroke in the medical fields. And I think in the next 10 years, we'll start to see some of that. Applications from devices such as embedded devices and processes. It still boils down to some guy putting a blood stain on a slide and looking at it 10,000 times over. We'll start to see some of the application of technology to that. I got a friend of a friend who worked for Google, whose wife died of cancer a few years ago, and they spent over $2 million trying to fight that cancer. And he started a company called Grail, and they figured out that over 100,000 blood tests, there are 30 markers they can find for cancer in a bloodstream long before they even know where it is in the body. They just do a blood test and say, you got cancer somewhere in your body, and they start testing to try and narrow it down. That type of breakthrough in the next 10 years is going to be much more common because we've got so much processing power to throw at these problems now in the medical field.
Would y'all mind if I threw in a comment? So two of the areas that you guys identified as where technology isn't solving the problems and the promises are two areas where government is stifling that innovation. So in the case of the government school system, you've got a one-size-fits-all government model that's not designed to produce thinking, independent thinking human beings. It's designed to present taxpayers, citizens, and order followers. In the case of medical education, you've got a system where the AMA has a monopoly on the ability to license medical schools, and so you've got essentially, as far as I can tell, the pharmaceutical industry controlling the information doctors receive to only have allopathic medicine. And so it's not necessarily a failure of technology, in these areas. It's this top-down control because there's money interests.
True, but technology figures out a way to disrupt things. It's the same way we're trying to disrupt currency with Bitcoin. I think there should be something disruptive coming, a process, a system.
Yeah, it's happening. So now there's Khan Academy, there's like there's a government monopoly being, kind of wiped away, and now, on the medical side, you can go and you can get information from the internet, you can go and you can get, you can pay private doctors, and you can go out and find a naturopathic physician, you can go out and find an organ molecular physician,
Right.
you have to go and kind of do the work, but, the internet is making that easy.
Right. My wife is an advanced practice nurse, a nurse practitioner, and she's working for a company now that she just does research now. And so you can go hire this company. You've got something on your hand and you want to know what it is, and you investigate, and the doctor gives you one diagnosis and another doctor gives you another diagnosis. You can go out and hire these research companies now to dig into tens of thousands of cases and figure out what that is, so you can have an independent third-party analysis of what that is on a research basis. And that's going to be software going forward, not just mechanical.
And we've got one from the back.
No. My wife works for Flatiron.
One big piece of this is jobs disrupted from technology, and I think that's a topic the panel should address. So
Well,
anybody want to talk?
Yeah, I've heard many people say, and this is what Jeff Bezos will say at Amazon, that he'll find over and over that when he obsoletes traditional businesses with technology, it always creates more jobs, because it's more jobs with people that need to have newer and more advanced skill sets, which actually translates to higher wages. So he's looking at, of course he has a bias and wants it to work this way, but he says in all his data that he's shown is that jobs are created and not destroyed by technology.
What happens when you disrupt the trucking industry, though? How do you retrain those individuals to take those higher skilled jobs? And that's a really interesting point. Well, we're talking about AI and VR and education. We're talking about these personal care, medicine abilities that are coming in the future. AI disrupting radiology. So how do people continue to sustain themselves going into the future? I've had a lot of thoughts on user data, and could user data be a tool if given back to the users, right? These companies make a lot of money off of data and insights into data. Could that ever be a way to pay someone enough to live and make their life more unique and interesting and fun? And
Hey, so I have to
engaging, right?
jump in here. One thing about technology is a tool. Technology is really cool. We all see different areas of ways we can apply technology to see the problem that we see in front of us. But the only way we're going to really move this industry forward is we all have to come together coordinated and think like architects. Market-wide, wide level, top down, right to left, architects of what are the ideals and principles we're building and setting the foundation for when we go out 5 years and 10 years. And even AI is really cool, but we're still at the beginning of it. We're like babies, right? If you look at mobile devices, it's been around for 20 years, 30 years, but in the grand scheme of human history, 30 years out of hundreds and thousands of years, we don't really know what we're talking about. I used to consult over at big, large software company, and they go, hey, so how do we predict the future? How do you help? Can you help us build a a model that'll help us figure out what targets to go after in terms of sales. And I just go, how are you doing that? And they'd always go, oh, we have all these like ginormous big data scientists. There's 20 of them. We're paying them $300,000 a year. And we still don't have it. And I go, well, that's because you're using data to predict the future. Data gives you a view into yesterday and today. Data does not give you a view into tomorrow, right? And then you look at all these consumer businesses and applications. Okay, applications, mobile tech, Apple, this has only been around for like a decade, a couple decades, especially at mass scale. What we think is AI, machine learning, big data, as cool as it may be, it's only a tiny blip of what the big impact will be. So the only way we're going to be able to predict the future is you go top down, right to left. We need to think like market-wide architects. And so I would always advise to them, car industries, right? Carpet industry. These industries have been around for hundreds of years. They know how they go after sales, and they nail it each time, right? If you're like a cloud company and you're trying to figure out how to do sales best, look at the carpet industry. Steal from them and then build your model out and iterate from there. Don't recreate the wheel, right?
I just want to make a brief point. Technology is great, but let's don't forget who builds it and who uses it. It's people, right? So, Twitter may have not been the greatest technology, but it's been successful because people use it. It only took a few people to build it because it was a relatively simple idea. But now it's huge because of the usage. And it's not even profitable.
So we talked about a couple areas when we're thinking about 10 years ahead. And I think to kind of sum up, if I get it right, we said that we've been disappointed to date in progress with medical, with education, with government, and that balance of freedom, right? The balance of freedom and control and regulation, and about how technology is related to employment, right? Meaningful employment. So now I'll kind of give one final task, which is 15 years ago was 2002, and I think the world looked a lot the same in 2002. There's quite a bit that's still the same. There's a lot that's been added. If we look at 15 years ahead, which would be, by my math, 2029, what is your version, your science fiction view of the future in 2029 with only one rule, which it cannot be dystopian? Your non-dystopian view of 2029.
We will not
Let the
use
futurists go.
screens. We will not use screens to access digital content. We will not have to go to a monitor. We will not have to go to a television. We will not have to pull a phone out of our pocket. Digital will be completely merged with physical, and it will exist in the world around us. We won't isolate ourselves in a room. We'll go out and explore the world, and we'll have digital everywhere.
And we'll but we'll be physically social again, like your presentation said the other day.
We will. Yeah. I mean, it will be a beautiful
we won't
thing
be like
because we try to become social through digital right now by sitting in front of a screen and scrolling through a feed, right?
What's the best sci-fi movie that exhibits what you think that might look like?
I'll give you a short film. Sight is a short film that you can watch.
What's the interface going to be though? Like Google Glass or like?
So think back to car phones, the brick phone, right? Right now, I have a device. It's called the HoloLens, and that's the brick phone of what we're seeing. We're going to go from the brick phone of this technology to where it's just integrated in a regular pair of glasses, and it's socially acceptable to wear these things in interactions. After that, right, yeah, we'll go to where it just exists as a small band that sits in front of your face, right, just right below your gaze, and it projects light into your eyes, just like we perceive light right now from our environment.
So how about
We'll go to contact lenses.
And you'll turn on and off devices by double blinking. And you'll see everybody double blink, and when their cameras were turned on or something.
all right, so interface is going to be different. Dino, what else? What's your non-dystopian future? 15 years out, 2029.
Well, so whenever I go into an Uber car, I ask the Uber driver, why are you an Uber driver? And everybody says, because I want to meet people. I mean, the second reason is because my wife wants me out of the house. That's the other one. But I think it's the community and being social and really, truly being open and having everybody's voice being heard on this global scale. And I'm not talking about Facebook or Twitter. It's something where we have some kind of openness. And when people share their views, I think the technology is going to allow people to be very open-minded because everybody's going to learn from everybody else. Everybody's going to understand there's another view, and that being biased, being left or right or not, is not what's important. It's just about learning and everybody growing each other. So I think the shareable economy, so Uber's just a piece of it. We know how to share taxis. I would love to share, the bandwidth at my house right now is being wasted. Every minute I'm not using it, I'm wasting a resource. Why can't you guys use some of that bandwidth to download a movie to your house or to do a Napster equivalent or something? So I think everything we can share. My self-driving car doesn't have to drive me, it could drive somebody else. I think by using all these resources and the technology, we could share everything. And the value of the sharing is not that we're optimizing resources, is that we will meet people because you jump in an Uber car and say, hey, why do you do this? What do you do for a living? Where do you live? We will learn from each other. Shareable economy will get us to be able to intersect more. And I think that's what's important.
Here, Dino.
You like that?
I can make a comment on that as well. He was a philosopher and social commentary. He was into social commentary. His name was Marshall McLuhan. He had this idea that we were moving into what he called the global village. So this idea of the global village is that we're going to be massively connected on a grand, distributed, peer-to-peer way, but we're also going to be so knowledgeable of each other through this reputation economy that we're building and the sharing economy that we're building, that things are going to get much easier. And actually in my talk just yesterday, I spoke on the psychology of how peer-to-peer transactions and decentralized technologies actually alter our psychology, can actually help us become more compassionate, more loving toward each other. And it's through these technologies and this movement into the future that we are going to be able to connect. We are going to be living in this global village where it's easier to understand one another, and it literally will change our neurology because of the environment, because of the context that we're brought up in.